Greetings and felicitations.
Hip, hip, hurrah, tally-ho.
Hey, Cutie Pie.
Hey, Puddin'.
What'd you think about the third James Bond movie that we watched together, Goldfinger?
It had some good stuff in it.
It's a lot of fun. Now, I consider this to really be the start of all the aspects of Bond that we've come to know and love, because we have Q, we have M, we have Moneypenny, we have gadgets, we have a car with gadgets, we have villains that are larger than life, exotic locales. Everything is coming together in this film. So for the earlier ones, we were seeing pieces of it, but now Goldfinger is really making headway as far as the formula of what makes Bond Bond.
It seems now they're finally getting into to setting up the tropes that really lasted. Yes, all the things are there, like you mentioned, that they kept going, like for the rest of the franchise.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the numbers. It was released in September 1964 in the UK.
Which was how long after the previous one?
A year.
Yeah, not that long.
They're coming in rapid succession, these early movies. But in the United States, it came 22nd of December. So it took a little longer to get to the United States. 110 minutes long. The budget was $3 million, but the box office was $125 million. So we could say that this is truly the first blockbuster. It wasn't just a success. It was a huge explosion.
And not just because of how much it made, but also consider that it cost twice as much to make as the previous one. They spent more money on this one. I mean, because the first two were so successful, they were able to get a bigger budget for this one, and it paid off big time.
Oh, it really did. I remember, this is like the fond memories I have of, because obviously we never saw this, we weren't born then. But talk to my father about these early Bond movies, because he was able to watch them when they came out in the theaters. And he said this is the one where the line was around the building. Everyone wanted to see Goldfinger. And as a teenager, his jaw and his friends' jaws dropped when they released the name of the femme fatale for the movie.
Really? Yeah, even before the movie came out, when they announced it.
It was the buzz. He said everyone in school was talking about it. Pussy galore.
Yeah.
Another thing that I like about this movie, and we talked about it before, we grew up in the Roger Moore era. We had to go back to watch the Sean Connery ones. This one, to me, really made sense on a lot of levels. The plot made sense. And it was easy to follow. James Bond was investigating a gold smuggler, and then he finds out that there is a larger plot that Goldfinger has planned. So every step of the way made sense.
Yeah, the plot was pretty good. I mean, I still felt like there were some scenes that were kind of slow in this movie. I mean,
it's kind of the time. It was of the time. That's true. Yes.
But it did have the action scenes. But I mean, the thing like the golf scene. I mean, it was so drawn out.
It was. It was. And if you don't play golf, if you don't follow golf, it could be tedious.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But even then, I liked how suave James Bond was. He has attention for detail. We already knew right from the beginning that Aura Goldfinger was a cheater. So if he was cheating at cards, you knew he was going to cheat at golf.
Oh yeah, I mean he was a villain. He was just that sly and conniving and underhanded, and I love how Bond was like he always knows what he's doing. That's part of the attraction of the character. He always knows what to do, and I mean, and you know how Q goes over the gadgets one time. And Bond has it. He knows exactly how to use it. I mean, doesn't read an instruction manual or anything. He just does it.
What I liked about this element of Q, because now instead of Q coming into the office to show Bond and M what he has, we are getting into the pattern of Bond going into Q's lair and to see all the devices that he's working on. We're never going to see it later on in the movie, but you got to think, at that time, wow, a bulletproof vest, that was probably pretty amazing.
And you sort of see all that in the background, and you think, oh wow, like so, and it's probably, it's like, it's not just for Bond, it's for all the agents. Oh, they're going to get all this neat stuff. Yeah, it was pretty cool to see that.
Especially the Aston Martin. You got to figure, this is the one, this Aston Martin with all its gadgets would be referred to from this point forward in all spy genre. I think about the video game Spy Hunter from the 80s. It had the oil slick. It had the machine guns. It had the smoke screen. We can pull it all back to this movie from 1964.
So it must have been, was it like the first of any movie that had like a car that was so spectacular that had all these things?
You know what I was thinking of too? This came out before the Batman TV series.
Oh, yes.
I mean, the only other car that I could think of that had all these gadgets would be the Batmobile. So this predates the Batmobile.
Well, but maybe in the comic books, though.
Yeah. You mentioned the comic books. Dr. No did get a comic. There was no comic book from Russia with Love, no comic book for Goldfinger. It's just one of those things I kind of wish, because we collect comics too, I wish they would continue the tradition of making comics of these movies.
Yeah, so this one just got missed, but they still... Yeah,
but they made
didn't
toys.
Think about it because they made so much money. And yeah, they did make toys from it.
This is when they really started making toys. A.C. Gilbert out of New Haven, Connecticut. And it's told the story many times over, is that when you lived in the New Haven area, there was so much overstock of these A.C. Gilbert toys that into the 70s and early 80s, we were still seeing them in stores that had overstock
so
items.
You're saying
we had them.
When the movie came out, they made that many toys.
They made so many. They didn't know what to do.
When you were a child, like in the 70s, a teen in the 80s,
and it was still, there was this place called Railroad Salvage, and it was kind of like like an Odd Lots. That's the best way I could describe it, or Odd Jobs. Everyone has these overstock stores in their towns, these big warehouse stores. There was so much A.C. Gilbert, James Bond stuff that it was around for a long time. And I remember playing with that little pool table that flipped around, and they weren't action figures per se. They were like little statues, but they had some action qualities to the devices that came with them. And then we saw the James Bond doll, the large size 12-inch James Bond doll during this time, and the Odd Job doll during this time. I mean, what did you think about Odd Job as a foil for Bond?
Yeah, he was a great villain. But yeah, I mean, I liked him as a character. He was like, he was so aloof, which a lot of the Bond villains are. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, the strength he had, and the hat must have been metal or something, right?
And we're seeing it that James Bond's villains are larger than life. We talked about the relationship to the car, the Aston Martin car to the Batmobile. I mean, James Bond's Rogues Galleries is like Batman's Rogues Galleries. We're building up now as they're all characters.
They're like, like super villains, superhero villains. I mean, yeah, just those qualities, the superhuman qualities, which is great on film. Mm-hmm. And he didn't really talk much either. Did he say anything?
No,
he did
not. Nope.
Yeah,
didn't. The lovely Bond ladies, right at the beginning, we had a beautiful girl, half naked, looking through binoculars, and then she would be nude, painted gold. That was another apparently controversial thing for the time.
Well, the she was used in a lot of advertisements for the movie to begin with. Mm-hmm. That just as a gold woman, which was, I mean, yeah, I can see that would be a great ad campaign. And
there were references to it in the credits. The gold woman with images on her.
Oh,
I
yes.
love the opening credits.
Scene,
They're beautiful.
Scene? Yes.
Sure. Wait, we didn't talk about the awesome song by Shirley Bassey, Goldfinger. This is the first time that there's a theme song with lyrics on a Bond movie.
And that was cool too. I mean, and the way, and it had a certain, the theme when she says, the tune of it when she says Goldfinger, and they kept playing that throughout the movie too.
See, I like that. Yeah. I like that better than the previous movie. Do you remember from Russia with Love? They kept playing the Bond theme at non-climatic parts. Whereas this, we heard the Goldfinger theme throughout the movie, which I think was a lot more cohesive. What did you think?
It fit the movie better.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about the body paint too. She was, I mean, because she had just been with Bond. They were in bed, and then when he got up and got hit on the head, and then woke up and she had been painted gold. Yeah, do you think that maybe if she wasn't already naked, they wouldn't have painted her?
I don't know. During this time, though, we see that we're going food and wine. Later on in this, Matt Sherman's going to jump in and talk about his reference points, especially in relation to little details that he knows so much about because he's a true Bond-phile. But Matt Sherman has a book about the food and drink of Bond. We see Bond wakes up and has chilled Dom Perignon. So early on in the franchise, we're having more high-level living. Remember, we saw the Rolex watch?
Yes, it was. So he's a high-class spy, only the best of everything, and that's another part of his appeal that always lasted, and that was always something the fans loved.
Absolutely.
We think that spies have such glamorous lives.
Remember when we met a real spy at SpyCon, and he was saying it's nothing like that in real life.
Yeah, I know, or really even that they don't even have a lot of spies anymore because they don't need them because satellites can
everything's electronic
figure
now.
out most things now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
sure, but this is the romanticized version of it, and I think that if it wasn't for this pivotal era of James Bond lore, we wouldn't have so many other great franchises in the spy genre that would blossom out of it. And we're seeing a lot of it just compacted into this movie. What were some of the other highlights that you noticed, that you enjoyed in the movie?
The lady pilots, that was pretty neat too.
Oh, they were great. Yeah, the flying circuit. Because the funny thing is, we just saw not too long ago the Blue Angels fly over Nashville.
Yes, and the way they have all the separate planes that can fly so close and keep the right amount of space and everything. It's
so
it's
to
really
see
neat.
it in real life and you look back at this and saying, wow, that's could have been Pussy Galore's flying circus.
Yes.
Honor Blackman, I thought she was fantastic.
She did a good job. She was a great femme fatale as well. And they actually like that part had been written for someone else, but once she got the part, I know they made her like they gave her some judo scenes because she could do judo, and so they put it in just because she could do that.
Interesting.
And I also understand that Goldfinger, his voice was dubbed for this movie, just like they dub a lot of voices in the previous movies.
That's one of the things, and it's with TV shows sometimes too. We'll watch some of these older ones, and you could tell it's the early stages of audio engineering because they're struggling with getting it looking right.
Yeah, there were things like that, and also I found out that one of the people that auditioned for the part of Goldfinger was Theodore Bikel. He's the one who played Worf's father on Star Trek.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, that's
and they
wild.
actually have his audition video out there on YouTube.
Okay, now we see a different version of Felix Leiter. Previous, it was Jack Lord. Now, all of a sudden, Felix Leiter aged 25 years.
Isn't it funny? I mean, that's the reason I never connected him.
I struggled with it as a kid too. Yes.
Realized it was supposed to be the same person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. As much as I love the Bond movies, it's one of those things that, what is the deal with switching roles so often with certain characters, and other ones that don't change at all. So it's going to be more noticeable as we go down the line, as you well know, but it's just so strange to me. Why would you even try to find someone that somewhat looks like Jack Lord?
I mean, I think it had to do with they were trying to find the right actor for this part. And I mean, and the only problem with Jack Lord is that he wanted too much money, I think, or they would have gotten him again. And then I think they just didn't keep this old guy because he didn't fit as well.
Mm-hmm. First time that audiences would see a laser beam in the movie. The original script had a buzzsaw instead. So, again, more technology. This is James Bond has that sci-fi element, which we love about it.
The laser beam, and they've used it in later movies too, but in other movies too. Mm-hmm. I mean,
what a classic line.
That's an iconic thing. For these kind of movies, for like a spy being stuck and they some exotic way to kill him. Yeah,
it's just like Batman. The villain tells his plan, getting ready to kill Batman, and then walks away. But this one, what a classic line this was. Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
I know, that awesome? Was like, because I saw that on a TV commercial too. So, yeah.
Loved it.
And they talked about a couple of things from the movie on, the TV show, Mythbusters. Mm-hmm. Because, they talked about Hollywood myths. Another thing going back to the body paint. And there's something called skin suffocation, like if your body if your whole body is painted. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I looked it up, and they said it probably wouldn't really happen, even though there are different factors. But we breathe through our nose and our mouth. We don't get oxygen through our skin, so it probably wouldn't happen.
Oh, see, I was taught that from a young age that there was some truth to that.
Yeah, I mean, there could be. Yeah, it's kind of because
it wasn't as extreme as they made it out to be.
Yeah, because a lot of things could go into it. And on Mythbusters, it was so strange because they didn't really want to take a chance, so they didn't paint the person's whole body, so they didn't really test it right.
Imagine if they did. Well, this person died. It proves that this really does happen.
But another thing they tested, like the Hollywood myth about a plane, when you have a plane in the air and if someone fires a gun and it shoots out a window and it depressurizes the whole cabin, none of that would really happen. Basically, if one window goes out, the plane is still the same. It's like you can still stay seated and everything.
But it must have some kind of suction. Something must happen,
not really,
right?
Nothing, because like out of the whole plane, that's just one small hole, and it just doesn't really. Yeah, that's what they showed on Mythbusters.
Amazing.
It really didn't affect it like that.
Okay, interesting. Apparently, though, now we don't live too far from Fort Knox. It almost seems like we have to take a day trip one of these days and go up there because it's a picturesque area. You talk about Kentucky. We've gone to Kentucky many times, see the horses and all that. But apparently at Fort Knox, they have this model in there. The model that was used from the movie. Bond. Yeah, how cool is that? Because none of this was filmed in America. Everything that was supposed to be in America was filmed over Pinewood Studios and overseas.
Oh, okay. Because they did kind of.
It looked good.
They wanted it to look like Kentucky. They said that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, apparently, Orson Welles was the first choice to be Goldfinger, but of course, too expensive.
I mean, yeah, it would have been neat to have someone famous. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But I think the actor that did it, Gert Frobe, did an excellent job. He became iconic in his own right.
I mean, I think Odd Job was more iconic.
Oh,
he
I think
kind of
so.
Stole the
yeah,
movie.
He did.
Yeah.
He did. And the fact that Goldfinger wore yellow or gold all the time, that was his trademark for what he would wear. I mean...
And that's cool, too.
It really is cool.
Yeah.
It really is cool. Like, all along the way, we're seeing the Bond films are building on what they had in previous movies. So, to make these characters, like the attention to detail, even for things like that, I found was very impressive.
Oh, and about the car, I did want to say that reminded me of Grease, the little the blade coming out of the
Oh,
tire.
yeah. Now, unfortunately, Ian Fleming was able to see the production of this movie, but he died before it was released, so he was never able to see the finished product.
And they put at the end of the movie that the next movie would be Thunderball.
Which I love that when they put it at the end of the movie with the next one that we're going to see. We know that historically this has not been the case. Sometimes they had to switch things around because they wanted to cash in on what was popular for the time. But
yes,
we definitely do look forward to seeing Thunderball next.
Hello, StarPodLog fans and listeners. This is Matt Sherman again from BondEvents.com. Please go to our site. We have 8 events listed now for 2020 and 2021. Yes, 8 events. Despite the COVID-19 crisis, these are not Zoom events. These are live events. We're excited about them. Next is a cruise. I can tell you more about that later. But first, bow, 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 wah, 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 Goldfinger. Ian Fleming's 7th Bond novel, Goldfinger, was a doozy, long and winding, like the roads Bond chases Goldfinger along in his Aston Martin in the novel. It's Ian Fleming's longest novel. And it is an epic Bond film, as we all know, started the height of the Bond craze in the 1960s. The 30-on film Goldfinger is amazing and sets the template. So many Bond films since have to be slightly different from Goldfinger while evoking Goldfinger and compete with Goldfinger while not being too close of an homage to Goldfinger, and so on and so forth. Most recently, Spectre took quite a few cues from Goldfinger, some of them quite successful, humor and style and so on. One of my favorite Goldfinger stories I want to tell you before we talk about the novel is this interesting encounter I had with a manager, now a friend, at a luxury hotel in Miami. A group of us stayed in Miami, dined together, we gathered from across the U.S. and Canada, and then we flew together afterwards to Jamaica for an event Janine and I were running, a week of Bond locations. But first we got together in Miami, and we had a real Bondian stay at the hotel. Everything was done to the nth degree. We had courtesy cocktails when we walked in, and they were Bond cocktails. We went to greet the manager and say thank you, a couple of us, and from a few feet away before I even got to the counter, the manager goes, "Hey, Mr. Sherman, that's the Goldfinger watch on your wrist." I had a watch on my wrist with the correct NATO strap from the film, the way collectors pursue screen-accurate props, and the manager recognized it in seconds. I mean, how many people out of 1,000 at a distance can go, "That's the watch in Goldfinger"? And it's not like the watch in Goldfinger is some kind of crazy gadget. It's seen on screen for about 2 seconds in the pre-title sequence when Bond is looking at his watch with his lighter. How long will it be till his bomb goes off? And it turns out the manager grew up with his dad, it's like so many of us, loving the Bond films, seeing Goldfinger over and over and again. And so we made a great Bond friend down a hotel and have a literal Bond manager to visit when we stay luxury style Miami. It's wild. And I love that story the more so because it takes place in Miami, and I've done umpteen tours with Janine or with friends through Miami because Miami has many locations from a number of Bond films and novels, but certainly abundant Goldfinger locations. As a matter of fact, many of you listening to the StarPodLog cast remember that, well, to give you the specifics of the story, the director of Goldfinger, Guy Hamilton, is driving around Miami, scouting locations. Remember, this is 1960-odd. And he sees a restaurant, and he goes, "Great, we don't have to bring the film crew to Kentucky. We can stick the CIA agents here at this restaurant. The restaurant's a Kentucky restaurant, and now Miami can double for Kentucky." That restaurant, of course, in the film, Kentucky Fried Chicken. He didn't realize they had many outlets throughout the United States. So when they're driving around Kentucky in the film, the palm trees and some of the street signs are a giveaway that you're in Miami and not Kentucky. Very interesting. Part of the fun on the tours that we do. Goldfinger is sparkling. It is the gold standard of Bond films. It started this amazing craze in memorabilia. The die-cast Aston Martin that Corgi reproduced, the beautiful silver birch Aston Martin DB5, has been in print now ever since. Going on 60 years, people are still buying Corgi, Goldfinger, Aston Martins, and they've been issued legally and otherwise by dozens of other toy manufacturers since, of course. Millions and millions of them sold. Even the soundtrack of the movie Goldfinger is glittering. After all, John Barry, who did 12, count them 12 Bond soundtracks, had these very interesting techniques and leitmotifs. I've talked about that before. You Only Live Twice has a Japanese sound and minor plucking. Goldfinger's soundtrack is actually in many places evocative of gold itself. Triangles and other instruments are used to go ting, ting, ting. Oddjob touches his hat. Ting! Somebody dies. Ting! And the very soundtrack reminds us of certain things in the film. Gold and the ticking clock of the atomic bomb that becomes the height of the film. If I may just share one thought from the novel and the film are quite similar, of interest, and I love Ian Fleming like nobody else, but Goldfinger is one of those films where a book did a beautiful job of becoming a film, and is one of those very, very, very few films to me that in certain places exceeds the original novel. For example, instead of Goldfinger stealing gold using a train, which would be challenging to film and run into a lot of costs as well, in the film, Goldfinger's just going to irradiate the gold. He's not really going to steal the gold at all, because with his train, he would have had to give gold to the hoodlums who were with him, and with his train, he wouldn't have time to get it all out of Fort Knox. So he's just going to nuke the gold using a Chinese device, wipe the gold. It'll be radioactive for 57 and a half years or so, and his gold will increase in value, he estimates, 10 times. So Goldfinger the movie is very, very close to the book. The book gives you these amazing rich details and a whole bit of James Bond spying and faking and cover storing and dining with Goldfinger at his giant manse in the UK and following Goldfinger through France, and whereas Goldfinger's a big cheat at golf in the film, in the book, Goldfinger cheats 7 different ways. Enjoy Goldfinger. Goldfinger was the novel I gave to my wife when she said, I want to read a Bond novel, what should I read? And we started with Goldfinger, and she enjoyed it. And it's a great novel. But my thesis for a report on it, late last year at SAMLA, South American Modern Languages Association. I co-chair panels there annually now on Ian Fleming and Goldfinger. And I did an interesting thesis, I think. You may not have heard it elsewhere. I don't think you have. I don't think it's appeared in print before. But you see Goldfinger in the novel. And you get a little bit of this with Bond in the film. But Goldfinger expresses Ian Fleming's personal wish to be more calculating. Ian Fleming himself was emotionally driven. His emotions on his sleeve, mercurial, willful, dark moods, melancholy. And sometimes, often, and I'll even say every Bond title that's a novel length, Ian Fleming comes up with a cool character aspect that he wants to explore and puts it inside the villain and or Bond and then plays with that. That's why the Ian Fleming novels are not a formula. They're all different. In From Russia with Love, Bond is so besotted with hedonistic desire that he's stumbling. Or in Diamonds Are Forever, he's just rough and aggressive and trying to smash things up. In Goldfinger, Bond and Goldfinger are very calculating. Let me give some examples of what I'm talking about. You see the subtext of the novel. Jill Masterton recounts to Bond Goldfinger's declaration that losers avoid making money when the odds are right, and that Goldfinger's always going on about the same thing, getting the odds right. Or what Goldfinger himself calls the second lesson: when the odds aren't right, make them right. Bond observes Goldfinger, waiting patiently for the odds to adjust themselves back in his favor, and discerns how Goldfinger earns money when the odds are right or adjusted to become so, even to leveraging the gold market precisely when the odds were right. Bond pierces through Goldfinger's innocent compound. He sees his secret factory, noticing the only odd thing about it was that it was brilliantly lit by arc lights. And when Bond sniffs out the edges of the Fort Knox caper, he assumes Goldfinger had some fantastic exploit in mind, but had gauged the odds and knew they were right. Goldfinger lectures Bond, be certain always the odds are right. And Bond tells Tilly Masterson he never moves unless the odds are right. Even Jack Strapp, the hoodlum, flatters Goldfinger. Mister, I figure you know the odds, and you surely pay the best, since one of our machines at Vegas got the trots and gave continuous jackpots. Strapp's assurance, in turn, relieves the other hood, the grinner, who misses the halcyon days of making a, quote, odd fin. Listen, if you don't believe my thesis, M says it 3 times. He remarks to Bond that it's funny about Goldfinger, odd chap, and also says to Bond, oddly enough, like all artists, he couldn't refrain from signing his handiwork, and starts Bond's mission saying, something's come up, odd business. And Bond tells Mr. DuPont in the novel, if Goldfinger starts to behave oddly, just sit quiet and watch. And you know what? Bond is forced to play golf with Goldfinger, who cheats 7 times in the novel, much more in the movie, because of Alfred Blacking's warning. It'll look odd you being here and short of a game. And when they play, Bond despises Goldfinger's faddish clothing, and he thinks, hey, people often wear bizarre clothes to the game, but other golfers don't think them odd. And who is the most titanic henchman in the Bond canon? It is, of course, Oddjob. So Goldfinger's about the odds, calculating, gambling, being cool under pressure, which Ian Fleming could be, but sometimes wasn't. And so the novel is an exploration of very cool, very calculating spy, James Bond, who's constantly adjusting his cover story, constantly making his move subtly, covertly, much unlike the other novels, sometimes where he's very brutal or lashes out or just blows stuff up the way Brosnan and Craig do in the movies. So Goldfinger, very interesting novel to me. Real interesting. I want to tell you this. If you haven't read an Ian Fleming book, get your hands on one and read it. You'll get a lot more out of the StarPod log casts and a lot more out of the Bond films. And to me, one of the biggest issues with the films is when filmmakers, even screenwriters say, oh, we've used all the Fleming material. We have to make up our own stuff for the films. Not at all. There are hundreds of little things and big things in the Ian Fleming novels that have never been on screen, and some of them are quite amazing. And I can tell you this, for those who love Casino Royale, to me, all the best stuff in Casino Royale is coming straight from the Ian Fleming novel, or is a slight twist on the novel. And Goldfinger, very, very, very close to the Ian Fleming novel. The differences are delightful, but there's a lot of power there in Ian Fleming's writing. That's why we adore his writing, and that's why we're holding annual conferences. StarPod log listeners, you can get involved if you want to send an email to me at baconbond@gmail.com or touch base with me through the bondfanevents.com website. I would love to get you involved presenting your thesis, your ideas at SAMLA. It doesn't have to be an academic paper. We've had people come up and do a 2,000-word academic paper with citations and resources. That's what I do annually. But we also have PowerPoint presentations where people talk more extemporaneously, off the cuff, and share their thoughts. And everything's up for grab. This year's event in November, it's going to be a virtual conference due to COVID-19, but hundreds of people will be gathering, and the topic of interest for the Bond folks is James Bond and scandal. So I've seen some amazing abstracts and proposals already, and it's going to be a blast. We also have special guests around the SAMLA conference. We're going to have Dexter Ingram, who is highly placed with the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS, led here in America, and Lawrence Keller, a friend of mine also, like Dex. And Lawrence was a former CIA non-official cover, or NOC, operative, and he'll be talking about his wartime and his CIA experiences and maybe teaching a little self-defense on Zoom if we're lucky. So we have some fun stuff coming up in November, and in October, a cruise where we will be visiting locations from the Bond films and novels, over a dozen of them. We have 45 people signed up for an October cruise. We have room for a few more if you want to spend over a week with James Bond fans and visit New Orleans and Key West and Nassau in the Bahamas, and along the way, at every stop, see dozens of Bond locations. By walking, by bus, by skydiving. Whatever it takes, we will get you to amazing locations. I've toured people around all these locations before. Come join us, and StarPod log listeners will get a special gift for joining us.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.